In the spring of 2009, a county extension agent named Dale Frick drove out to a 12-acre plot in Dimmitt County, Texas, parked his white pickup on the gravel shoulder, and spent about 40 minutes walking the beds before he told Rosalind Vela that her garlic was too small to sell. Not unacceptably small. Not marginally small. He phrased it the way a man with a state university badge and 23 years of field experience phrases things when he is certain the evidence is on his side, and the kindness is in being direct. He said the bulbs would not grade above a jumbo, probably not above a large, and that the premium wholesale buyers who paid anything worth talking about were buying exclusively in the extra-colossal range, 8 to 9 centimeters at the equator. He held one of her bulbs up and turned it slowly in the March light. Clean cure, he said. Good papery wrapper, but she would need to run larger cloved California stock if she intended this to be a business and not a garden. He set the bulb back on the soil and patted it gently, as if returning a child's toy. Rosalind thanked him. She did not argue. She watched his truck raise a thin tail of caliche dust on the county road, and then she walked back to the north bed and knelt in the soil and pressed 2 fingers against the neck of the plant nearest her and checked the moisture, the way her grandmother Conception had taught her to do before she could reach the kitchen counter. By the fall of 2023, Rosalind Vela was selling her entire harvest, every head, before the first week of June. She had not shipped a single bulb to a wholesale grader. She had not spoken to a distributor. 3 Michelin-starred kitchens held year-round allocations on her crop. The smallest allocation, held by a restaurant in Houston, was 22 pounds per week, 44 weeks of the year. The per-pound price those kitchens paid was $26. At that price, 12 acres of garlic becomes something Dale Frick's spreadsheet never had a column for. This is the story of the 14 years between that March morning and that September harvest, and of what Rosalind Vela knew about garlic that the grading system was not designed to see. Let me tell you about the garlic first, because without understanding the garlic, the numbers make no sense at all. The bulbs Conception Vela had grown on this same plot in Dimmitt County went back to seed stock that her own mother had carried in a muslin sack from the highlands south of Zacatecas when the family came north in 1951. The variety had no commercial name. It was not in any seed library Rosalind could find in 2001 when she first went looking. It was not in the USDA germplasm collection. It was not Ajo Rojo, and it was not Morado de Pedroneras, and it was not any of the 36 named Spanish purples that are fashionable now. It was a thing her great-grandmother had grown, and her grandmother had grown, and that her mother, who died when Rosalind was 17, had grown in a clay pot on an apartment balcony in San Antonio because she could not bear to stop growing it, even when there was no ground to put it in. The bulb was small. Dale Frick was not wrong about that. An average head out of Rosalind's north bed ran 5 to 6 centimeters at the equator, sometimes 5.5 at the widest clove plane. Against a Gilroy commercial crop running 8 or 9 centimeters, it was not a competitive object. It would not fill a pound bag with the uniform globes that a produce buyer wanted to stack on a grocery display. It did not photograph the way the large caliber California whites photograph. It looked, frankly, like what an extension agent would call a garden garlic, a sentimental thing, a hobby plant. What the grading system measured was size. What the grading system could not measure was what happened when you cut one of those small heads open. The interior of a Vela garlic clove was a dense, saturated purple-white, much richer in color than the ivory interior of a commercial softneck. The oil content, which Rosalind did not have words for in 2009 and which she did not have laboratory numbers for until 2017, was roughly 40% higher per gram of dry matter than a standard California softneck. That oil carried the flavor compounds, and the flavor compounds in this garlic were not simply stronger. They were different in their composition, weighted toward allyl disulfides and thiosulfonates that carry a low, sweet, almost floral front note before the heat arrives. It did not burn the way a commercial clove burned. It opened the way a good wine opens, in sequence, the heat arriving as a finish rather than as a first impression, and it held its flavor profile through high-temperature cooking at temperatures and durations that vaporized the flavor out of a commercial clove in 90 seconds. Rosalind did not know the chemistry in 2009. She knew the taste because she had been tasting it her whole life. She knew it behaved differently in a pan because she had been cooking with it since she was a child. She knew it kept differently in storage because she had watched her grandmother cure it and hang it and use it through February and into March without degradation, something a commercial softneck simply does not do in a home kitchen. She did not know how to say any of that to Dale Frick in language he could enter into a spreadsheet, and she suspected, correctly as it turned out, that even if she had tried, it would not have changed what he wrote in his report. Rosalind was 41 in 2009. She had worked 12 years in commercial kitchen management, first in San Antonio, then briefly in Dallas, before she came back to Dimmitt County in 2004 to take over the plot after her grandmother died. She drove back in a truck with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of kitchen reference books and a single canvas bag of seed heads from the Zacatecas strain that her grandmother had pressed into her hands at a visit 2 years earlier, with a kind of firmness that means, I need you to understand this matters. Rosalind had kept them in the vegetable drawer of her apartment refrigerator for 24 months, cycling them into crisper conditions in late summer as Concepcion had instructed, waiting for the ground that would eventually be hers. She was known in the county for 2 things: her patience with a problem that did not resolve quickly, and a precision with growing conditions that the other garlic growers in the area, most of whom ran 2 or 3 acres of commercial softneck alongside other crops, found slightly excessive. She replanted from her own saved stock every year, selecting seed cloves from the largest and most aromatic heads in the prior harvest, the way Concepcion had taught her, the way Concepcion's mother had taught Concepcion. She amended her beds with composted goat manure sourced from a neighbor's herd rather than with synthetic nitrogen, because she had watched the synthetic nitrogen push fast vegetative growth that diluted the oil content in the clove. The nitrogen made the plant grow fast and big and hollow-flavored, the way forcing growth in any direction tends to thin the thing you are hoping to deepen. Rosalind had watched this across 3 seasons of comparison beds before she satisfied herself it was not a coincidence. She planted in October, not September, which the regional calendar called late, because the October soil temperature in Dimmitt County held at a range that slowed the root establishment just enough to encourage deeper anchoring before the first flush of leaf growth, and deeper roots meant more consistent moisture draw across the growing season, and more consistent moisture draw meant more consistent allicin precursor accumulation in the developing bulb. She lifted in early May before the soil temperature in June could stress the papery wrappers and begin the slow internal degradation that reduced shelf life. She cured in shade with forced air circulation for 21 days, not the 14 days that most commercial growers used, because the extra week drove the moisture content of the wrapper down to a level that allowed her to store into February without any of the neck rot that plagued the commercial growers who rushed the cure. None of this was on a schedule she had written down. It was on a schedule she had absorbed. She had not learned any of that from a textbook. She had learned it from watching 43 consecutive harvests over her lifetime, from her grandmother's narration of every deviation and outcome, from a journal Concepcion had kept in a stiff cardboard-covered notebook, written in Spanish, that sat on the kitchen table, under a glass paperweight shaped like a hand. The notebook ran to 219 pages. The first entry was dated October 1961 and described a planting in which the seed cloves had been stressed by a late September dry spell and the germination rate had been lower than expected, and what Concepcion had done about it. Every subsequent entry was calibrated to that same standard of precision, recording not what happened in the abstract, but what she had done, and what had resulted, and what she concluded, and whether she was sure of the conclusion or only tentative. The tentative conclusions were marked with a small question mark in the margin. There were many of them. Conception did not rush toward certainty any more than she rushed the cure. The extension agent's report called the operation a boutique liability. That phrase reached Rosalind through a neighbor who had been present at the county growers' meeting, where Dale presented his survey findings in November 2009. The survey covered 11 small garlic operations in the region. Dale's recommendation for operations in the under 8-centimeter size range was to transition to California softneck varieties within 2 seasons or exit the crop. He presented the recommendation with the careful fairness of a man who genuinely believed he was helping. He was not wrong about the grading system. He was not wrong about the wholesale market. He was wrong about what the wholesale market was measuring, and whether that measurement was the only one that mattered. Rosalind heard the phrase boutique liability and returned to her beds. In 2010, she brought in 4,200 pounds of cured garlic and sold it at a county farmer's market in Carrizo Springs, and through a small mail order list she had built from market customers over her first 5 seasons on the plot. The per-pound price at the market was $7, which was $3 above the commodity price for premium commercial garlic that season. She drove 40 minutes each way on Saturdays with the cured heads stacked in wax boxes in the bed of the truck, and she set up her table in a spot she had been using since 2005, between a woman who sold Anaheim chilies and a man who sold honey. She brought a cutting board and cut samples for anyone who stopped. The samples brought people back. The samples brought people back the next week and the week after that, and eventually they put their names on her list. The market customers who came back reliably, who put their names on her list, who emailed to ask when the new harvest would be ready, were mostly home cooks. Some were restaurant people. She talked to all of them. She asked what they noticed. She asked what it did in the pan. The answers organized themselves over 2 seasons into a pattern she recognized from her own kitchen experience. You might have your own sense of what you would notice if you cut a head of garlic like that open next to a commercial head and smelled them both. If you do, leave it below. The people who came back to the table every Saturday were not garlic enthusiasts in the way that collectors are enthusiasts. They were cooks who had encountered something that behaved differently in the kitchen, and I wanted to understand why, and who came back because they could not get the same result with anything else they could find. Let me tell you what that pattern was, because it is the mechanism the story turns on. When a home cook or a professional cook uses commercial garlic, the cooking window is narrow. The alicin, which is the primary flavor-active compound, forms when the cell walls are broken and the enzyme allinase contacts its substrate. In a commercial softneck clove, that reaction is fast and the product is volatile. It begins degrading under heat within 60 to 90 seconds. A professional cook working a sauté station at high volume cannot hold garlic in a hot pan beyond that window without developing bitterness, and cannot undershoot that window without delivering rawness. The window is a constraint the kitchen manages around, not a tool the kitchen uses. In a Vela clove, the reaction was slower to peak and more stable under heat. Rosalind's customers told her they could hold the garlic in the pan longer, work it into a base at lower temperatures, use it in applications where commercial garlic would have surrendered its flavor entirely. A chef who worked at a high-volume Italian kitchen in San Antonio told her at the 2012 county market that her garlic stayed present in a braise where commercial garlic disappeared. He said that as a matter of fact, not as a compliment. He was a compact man in his mid-30s with the kind of forearms that come from years of lifting stock pots, and he stood at her table for a long time, turning a cured head in his hands before he said anything. He had been to the market before and passed her table without stopping. That day he stopped because the woman beside him, a chef he respected from a Mediterranean place on the River Walk, had pointed. His name was Marco Reyes. He bought 60 pounds that season and told 2 other chefs about her, both of whom called her at the number on the market card she had printed at an office supply store in 2009 and used unchanged since. In 2013, Rosalind sold to 4 restaurants, all in San Antonio. Her total harvest was 5,800 pounds. She priced wholesale restaurant supply at $11 per pound and kept the retail market list at $13. She had not advertised. She had not built a website. She had not hired a sales representative. She had not applied for a specialty crop grant or appeared in a food publication, or entered any of the regional food competitions that were beginning to proliferate in those years. Every account had come through a cook who had cooked with her garlic and told another cook. The channel was narrow and slow, and it was the only channel she needed, because it was the channel that moved product to people who understood what they were buying and came back reliably at the price that the quality warranted. Her neighbor to the south was a man named Ernesto Garza, who ran 6 acres of commercial softneck alongside a small onion crop. Ernesto was not a careless farmer. He was a careful, competent operator who followed the county extension recommendations the way a professional follows a field guide, and who had been farming this ground for 28 years. He was known in the county for 2 things himself: his equipment, which was always well-maintained and newer than most people in the area ran, and his yields, which had been consistently at or above the county average for softneck every year he had data on. He attended every extension meeting. He read the production bulletins. He subscribed to the Southwest Farm Press and could tell you the commodity price projection for the next 2 seasons without looking it up. He was exactly the kind of farmer the county extension system was designed to serve, because he was exactly the kind of farmer who listened to it and implemented what it said. In 2011, he had installed a drip irrigation system that the Extension Office had recommended at a cost of $14,000, financed at 5.5% over 7 years. In 2013, he bought a used transplanter to mechanize his onion sets, another $9,000. His per-pound price for extra colossal softneck that year was $3.80. His yield per acre was 4,000 pounds. He grossed a little over $90,000 on 6 acres and spent nearly $40,000 in direct inputs before debt service. The debt service on the drip system alone ran $217 a month. Rosalind grossed $63,800 that year on 12 acres. and spent $11,000 in direct inputs. She had no equipment debt. She transplanted by hand with 2 seasonal workers she had employed consistently for 8 years, a man named Hector, who had come to her first in 2005 and returned every season, and his sister Marta, who had joined in 2007. She saved her own seed stock, which cost her nothing beyond the selection time and the storage. Her largest capital investment in any single year to that point had been a used walk-behind bed, former she bought in 2007 for $800. She kept it in the barn under a tarp and maintained it herself. Dale Frick attended the Dimmitt County Growers Meeting in February 2014 and mentioned in passing that he had heard the Vela operation had found some restaurant buyers, which was a sensible niche for an anomaly like her variety, and that he hoped she was not banking on it long-term because the specialty restaurant market was notoriously fragile. He said, "Anomaly the way you say it when you mean exception. The thing that proves the rule rather than the thing that revises it." Rosalind was present. She did not respond. She ate her dinner roll and listened to the rest of the meeting. That same month, her granddaughter Elena came home from her second year at Texas A&M, where she was studying agricultural business. Elena was 20 years old, and she had her grandmother's bone structure and her great-grandmother Conception's directness and a degree program that had given her a vocabulary for describing the world in terms of margins and scalability and market concentration. And she was at the age when a new vocabulary feels like a complete set of tools. She had grown up watching her grandmother sell garlic at a farmer's market table, while the Garza operation ran equipment across the road, and she associated the market table with smallness, with the kind of operation that the business curriculum at A&M called a lifestyle business, which was what the curriculum called a business that paid you to work hard for modest returns, and told itself a story about why the modest returns were acceptable. Elena said this to Rosalind in the kitchen in March 2014, with the cardboard notebook on the table between them. She said it carefully, with the care of someone who is delivering an assessment they believe to be honest and have composed in advance. She said she thought the garlic was wonderful, but that the economics of handwork at 12 acres did not pencil at a scale that could sustain the land long term. She said she thought the restaurant channel was fragile and that the per-pound price would compress as more specialty garlic entered the market. She was 20 years old, and she said it with the confident precision of someone who has just learned a vocabulary for describing a problem and is applying it everywhere they can. She was not wrong about the logic of the model she was describing. She was working from a model that did not have a column for what Rosalind's garlic actually was. Rosalind listened. She poured Elena more coffee. She did not disagree with the analysis. Rosalind listened. She poured Elena more coffee. She did not disagree with the analysis. She said, in the level way she said most things, that Elena should come out to the beds in the morning, and they would walk them together. They walked them the next morning, in the thin March light with dew still on the papery wrappers of the overwintered plants. Rosalind moved through the beds slowly, naming each variety of amendment she had applied the prior fall, and what she had observed about the response, pointing out where a section of bed had performed differently, and what she suspected the cause was. She was not lecturing. She was narrating a set of observations the way Conception had narrated them to her, as data that required interpretation and that might require revision. She had been wrong about things in this ground. The notebook had those entries, too. She pulled a test head from the north bed, an early pull to check maturation, and she cut it cleanly on the board she had carried out with her, and she handed half to Elena and held the other half herself. The cut surface of the center clove was a dense purple-white, slick with oil, and the smell that came off it was immediate and rich in a way that moved through the front of the nose before the heat arrived. Elena stood with the cut half in her hand for a moment without saying anything. Rosalind showed her the oil on the knife blade. She explained the heat stability and the window issue in the professional kitchen, using the language she had absorbed from 14 years of talking to cooks, the language Marco Reyes and Judith Farrow and the others had given her for what they experienced in the pan. She showed Elena the color comparison between a Vela head and a commercial soft neck she had bought at the Carrizo Springs grocery the week before for the purpose. The difference was visible before you cut either one. After you cut them both, the difference was not subtle. Then she showed Elena Concepcion's notebook. She translated 3 entries that described the selection protocol for seed stock. Always the largest clove from the most aromatic head, never the outside cloves, always from the second ring and where the oil content was highest, and always from the head that had been hardest to lift, which Concepcion believed indicated deeper root development that indicated more stable moisture uptake across the season, which she had documented across 11 comparative seasons without being certain it was not coincidence and marking it with a question mark until the 12th season, when she removed the question mark. Elena did not say anything for a while. She put the knife down and looked at the cut bulb, and then she looked at the notebook, which was open to an entry from 1974. If she stays, Rosalind thought, it will not be because of anything I said. That spring, a woman named Judith Farrow came to Dimmitt County from Houston. She was the purchasing director for a group that ran 4 restaurants in Houston and 2 in Austin, 2 of which held Michelin recognition. She had driven 4 hours because a chef she trusted had described the Vela garlic in terms that made her suspicious they were exaggerated, and she wanted to see for herself. She had a reputation in the Houston restaurant supply world for not being impressed by things that were trying to impress her, and she had not called ahead, which was how she preferred to work. She arrived on a Tuesday morning in a gray sedan, and she found Rosalind in the north bed adjusting a drip emitter that had been running slow. She brought her own knife. It was a small folding knife in a leather sleeve that she kept in her jacket pocket, and she had been using it to evaluate produce for 12 years. She cut 3 heads in the middle of the north bed, standing in the soil in shoes that were clearly not designed for soil and not apologizing for it, and she held each cut half up to her nose for a long time before she spoke. She had the manner of someone who has tasted a great number of things and knows precisely what they are looking for and has mostly not found it, and who is being careful not to say anything premature. She asked Rosalind how much of the crop was allocated. About half, Rosalind said, to 7 accounts. Judith asked what the price was. Rosalind told her. Judith did not negotiate. She put the 3rd cut head down and looked at Rosalind for a moment with the evaluating stillness she had applied to the garlic. Then she asked whether she could hold an allocation for $18 per pound on 40 pounds per week for her 2 strongest kitchens, and whether she could have right of first refusal on any expansion of production. Rosalind said she would think about it and call her in 3 days. Judith handed her a card and walked back to her car and drove 4 hours home. That was the fall of 2015. The per-pound price for Ernesto Garza's extra colossal soft neck that same season was $4.12. The summer of 2018 arrived in Dimmitt County with a heat that did not behave the way heat in that county usually behaved. The seasonal maximum for June in that region typically ran 98 to 102 degrees Fahrenheit. In June 2018, the thermometer at the Uvalde station, which was the closest official reading station to Rosalind's plot, recorded 17 consecutive days above 108 degrees with overnight lows that did not drop below 84. It did not rain between the 14th of May and the 22nd of August. The soil cracked in the fields. The native grasses along the county road turned the color of old paper and lay flat. The pond at the back of Ernesto's property dropped 4 feet, and the cattails went brown from the roots up. The Cooperative Extension issued an agricultural emergency advisory on July 3rd. The advisory noted that the projected yield impact for summer maturing alliums in the region was severe, and that growers who had not completed harvest by mid-May faced substantial losses. The advisory was accurate. Rosalind had lifted her harvest in early May, as she always did, before the heat fully arrived. Her cured crop was hanging in her cellar. The cellar held 420 running feet of drying rope across 9 racks, and every rope was occupied, and the air smelled the way it always smelled in late summer when the cure was complete, and the wrappers had dried down to parchment, and the heads had settled into the quiet, chemical patience that would carry them through February. Her saved seed stock for the October planting was in canvas sacks in the same cellar, sorted and labeled in Elena's handwriting, which was neater than Rosalind's and included the bed of origin and the selection rationale for each bag in a notation system Elena had developed in 2015 that was more organized than anything Concepcion's notebook had used, and less certain than anything Concepcion's notebook had contained, which was appropriate for someone 2 years into a learning she understood would take decades. The cellar was an underground room her grandfather had dug in 1967, lined with limestone blocks that maintained a temperature between 58 and 63 degrees year-round, regardless of what was happening above it. Her grandfather had dug it for wine storage. He had not owned any wine. He had read about root cellars in a farming almanac and spent 3 weeks digging a room that his wife thought was excessive and that Concepcion had used for garlic storage within a year of his death, and that Rosalind now thought of as the most valuable thing on the property, valued well above the acreage or the equipment or the truck. Ernesto Garza had not finished harvesting his softneck by mid-May. He was running behind because his irrigation pump had failed in late April, and the repair had taken 18 days to source and install, because the parts had to come from a supplier in San Antonio, and the supplier was backed up. When the heat arrived in June, approximately a third of his remaining crop was still in the ground. The bulbs in those beds cooked in the soil, the cell walls degrading in the sustained heat, and the wrappers going soft and then brown and then past anything salvageable. He lost 1,100 pounds of harvestable garlic and the entire stand of overwintered onion sets he had been planning to market in August, totaling roughly $14,000 in product at that season's price. More critically, the heat and the drought differential between his irrigated and dry sections cracked his drip lines across 4 beds where the soil contraction had been uneven, and the repair estimate came in at $6,000 at a time when he was carrying $31,000 in remaining equipment debt and had just lost $14,000 in standing crop. Ernesto Garza was not a man who complained readily. He told Rosalind about the losses one morning at the fence line between their properties in a matter-of-fact way that made it clear he had already absorbed the worst of the accounting and was past the stage of being upset about it. He was figuring forward. That was what he did. Rosalind's crop was in the cellar. Her beds were empty. Her seed stock was safe. She gave Ernesto 400 pounds of garlic from her cellar inventory at her direct production cost, which was $2.12 per pound, to use as eating stock and to sell through his market contacts while he recovered. She offered it as what it was, a neighbor helping a neighbor through a bad season, without framing it as a demonstration of anything or attaching any meaning to it. She drove it over in her truck on a Saturday morning and unloaded it in his barn and drove home without staying for coffee. The County Cooperative Extension issued a drought advisory in August 2018. Dale Frick attended a field day for affected growers at the Extension office in Carrizo Springs in September. He talked about irrigation scheduling and varietal resilience. He did not mention the Vela operation by name. He mentioned as a general observation that operations with early lift varieties and below-ground storage had fared better than operations with later maturing varieties and surface storage, and that there was something worth studying in that pattern. He said this carefully, the way a careful man says a thing that costs him a little to say. That October, Rosalind planted her beds as she always did. Elena had been back full-time since graduating in May. She had modified her analysis. In the spring of 2019, a chef named Willem Hartog, who ran a restaurant in Houston that had held 2 Michelin stars since 2016, called Judith Farrow's office and asked specifically about the garlic she was sourcing from South Texas. Judith sent him a sample packed in a small wood box with a linen cloth, the way Rosalind had started packing samples in 2017. After Elena pointed out that the presentation mattered to people who were accustomed to premium products arriving presented as premium products. He called back the next day and asked for a visit. He drove down in April to walk the beds with Rosalind and Elena. He was a long man with a quiet voice and the particular stillness of someone who thinks carefully before speaking and is accustomed to rooms that wait for him. He spent an hour in the north bed before he said anything worth recording. He walked the rows slowly with his hands behind his back and stopped occasionally to crouch and look at the neck of a plant or the color of the soil at the bed edge. He did not ask questions that first hour. He watched. Then he asked Rosalind whether she had ever tried roasting a whole, uncleaned head in a wood-fired oven at high temperature, and how long it held its flavor at the center clove after a 90-minute roast. She had. She described what happened, precisely and without embellishment, the way she described all culinary observations. The oils caramelized slowly rather than burning at the wrapper interface. The inner cloves remained distinct rather than collapsing into a uniform paste. The sweetness held its register, underneath the roast character, for considerably longer than any commercial variety she had tested the same way. He nodded for a long time. He was looking at the north bed when he did it, not at her. He asked how much unallocated crop she expected in the fall. Elena said about 800 pounds, maybe 1,000. He said he would take all of it and asked what the price was. Elena said $22 per pound. He said yes and asked if they could expand production. Elena said the 12 acres were what the land supported at the handwork level, and that was the level at which the quality held. She said it without apology and without elaborate explanation, in the direct declarative way she had absorbed from watching Rosalind answer that question, and he accepted it the same way, which was to say he nodded once and did not push further. He had run kitchens long enough to understand that the things that could not be scaled were frequently the things most worth having. Let me tell you what that meant on the ledger, because the ledger is where the argument settles. In the harvest season of 2019, Rosalind and Elena sold 10,240 pounds of cured garlic. The weighted average price across all accounts was $19.60 per pound. Total gross revenue was $200,704. Direct production cost for that year, including labor, soil amendments, curing supplies, and the wages of Hector and Marta, who had been with the operation for 15 and 13 years, respectively, and whom Rosalind paid above the regional rate for agricultural labor because she had made that decision in 2007 and had not revisited it, was $31,800. There was no equipment debt. There was no land debt. The 12 acres had been debt-free since 2001. Net operating income for fiscal year 2019 was $168,904 on 12 acres of garlic. Eleanor read that number from the farm ledger at the kitchen table in November 2019, with Concepcion's notebook open beside the current ledger, and she looked at her grandmother for a long time. Rosalind was looking at the notebook, not the ledger. Rosalind poured coffee and did not say anything. The numbers sat between them on the table. It did not need commentary. It was not a surprise, exactly, in the sense that every year's arithmetic had been building toward it through consistent, incremental steps that both of them had watched accumulate. Every restaurant account added, every price adjustment justified by demand rather than concession. Every season, the 12 acres held their production ceiling, and the quality held with it. Every year, the seed selection ran one more generation deep in this particular ground. The arrival was earned. That was what made it feel heavy rather than lucky. $168,904 on 12 acres. In a year when Dale Frick's drought report had documented that the conventional garlic operations in the county had lost a combined average of 31% of gross revenue to heat and input cost volatility. Ernesto Garza had ended fiscal 2019 with a net operating income of $14,200 on 6 acres. He had retired his irrigation debt the year before. He was still on the soft-neck grading system. He was still at $4 per pound. The next morning, Judith Farrow received a document that Elena had prepared summarizing the prior season's allocation fulfillment and pricing structure. She called that afternoon and asked if the operation would consider a fixed-term allocation agreement for a minimum of 3 years. She wanted certainty of supply for her strongest kitchens. She wanted to be able to tell Willem Hartog and her other starred clients that they were protected. Elena said she would review the terms and respond within a week. She did. The agreement, she countered with, protected the operation's right to adjust price annually based on production cost, prevented sublicensing of the allocation, and required quarterly visits by the kitchen team to the farm, which Rosalind had insisted on because she wanted the people cooking her garlic to understand where it came from. Judith accepted all of it. Dale Frick retired from the Dimmitt County Cooperative Extension Office in March 2021. At his retirement reception at the Carrizo Springs Community Hall, Rosalind brought him a cured head from the prior October planting, wrapped in a square of brown paper. She handed it to him in the line, and he looked at it for a moment, and then he looked at her. He said he thought he owed her an apology. She said he had given her the best information available to him at the time, and that she hoped he enjoyed the garlic. He stood there holding it with both hands. After the reception, Ernesto Garza caught up with Rosalind in the parking lot. He had been watching the Vela operation from across the road for 16 years. He asked her directly and without embarrassment whether she would be willing to teach him the selection protocol for building a comparable seed stock from scratch. He understood it would take years. He understood it was not something you could rush. He said he had some ground in the north corner of his property that did not pencil for mechanical cultivation, and that he thought it might be worth trying a handwork approach on 4 or 5 acres if she was willing to help him think through it. Rosalind said yes. She invited him over for dinner that Saturday, and she brought out Concepcion's notebook. Elena translated the seed selection entries out loud while Rosalind cooked. Ernesto took careful notes in a spiral-bound tablet he had brought from his truck, and when he left that night, he had 3 pages of notes and 4 seed heads from Rosalind's current stock selection that she had set aside for him specifically. By 2022, he had 2 acres of the Vela strain in his north corner, coming into their second growing season, which is when the selection pressure begins to express itself in the soil and the stock begins to reflect the place it is in rather than the place it came from. He had a long way to go. He knew that. In the spring of 2023, Elena drove up to Houston to deliver a sample case to Willem Hartog's kitchen and to meet the sous chef who handled their garlic prep, a young woman named Sonia who had grown up in the Rio Grande Valley and recognized the variety on sight, or thought she did, and said her grandmother grew something similar, but smaller. Elena asked her to describe it. They talked for 40 minutes. Elena left with 3 questions she could not answer and 1 new contact for a possible seed comparison, which she brought home to Rosalind on a folded piece of paper. That fall, the 3rd Michelin-starred allocation locked in for the 2024 season. The total committed allocation across all 3 starred accounts was 68 pounds per week across 44 weeks of the year. The price per pound for those accounts was $26. The remaining unallocated crop, roughly 2,000 pounds, moved through the original restaurant list and a small direct-to-cook subscription that Elena had built in 2021 and capped at 40 households. The waiting list for the subscription had 93 names on it. Rosalind and Elena did not expand the 12 acres. They had been asked. By Judith, by Willem, by a food media company that wanted to partner on a branded product line. The answer was the same each time. 12 acres was what the land supported at the level of attention the quality required. There was no version of this operation that scaled and remained this operation. The knowledge was not transferable to a management layer that had never knelt in these beds. The selection protocol required someone who had done it long enough to feel the difference in a clove between their fingers before they cut it. You could not write that into a job description and hire for it. This is the part that the people asking about expansion could not quite hear. The conventional world has a model for value. The model says that if something is worth $26 a pound, it is worth growing more of. And if you can grow more of it, you should. The model is internally consistent. The model is built on the assumption that the quality is stable across scale, that what makes the thing valuable can be reproduced at volume, that the knowledge required to produce it can be transferred to systems and personnel rather than residing in the hands and eyes of particular people who have been doing a particular thing on a particular piece of ground for a long time. The model is wrong about some things. There's a kind of knowing that lives in a place and in a body and in a sequence of seasons, and it is not portable the way a procedure is portable. Conception Vela selected seed cloves by feel and by smell before she cut them, standing in the October ground in a way her granddaughter had watched and absorbed before she understood that she was absorbing it. Elena Vela had been doing the same thing for 5 years by 2023, and she was only beginning to trust her own hands. Rosalind had been doing it for 40 years, and she still sometimes went back to the notebook. The notebook was not the knowledge. The knowledge was not in the notebook. The notebook was the record of a person paying attention over many seasons to what happened when she made particular choices. And the attention itself was the inheritance, not the record. What Concepcion passed on was not a procedure. It was a way of looking, sustained over time, at one piece of ground. The grading system had a column for size. It had a column for color and a column for curing uniformity, and a column for caliber. It did not have a column for what happens at minute 4 of a high-heat sauté. It did not have a column for what a clove smells like when you press it between your thumb and forefinger before you break the skin. It did not have a column for what 73 years of selection pressure from a single family's preference does to an unregistered landrace variety grown in the same caliche soil in Dimmitt County, Texas. The things that do not have a column are sometimes the things that matter most. Ernesto Garza figured that out after the summer of 2018, kneeling in cracked ground on his north corner with Rosalind's 3 pages of notes in his hand. Dale Frick figured it out holding a wrapped head in a community hall parking lot, standing still for a long moment in a way that cost him something. The garlic Elena takes from the cellar in the early morning still smells the way it smelled when Rosalind was a child watching her grandmother sort the harvest on a card table in the October sun. Some things do not change because they have never been made to be efficient. They have only been made to be true, and true things endure past the moment the model runs out of columns. What is rigid breaks. What is patient and particular and careful about one piece of ground outlasts the drought. Conception's notebook sits on the table under the glass hand. Elena works the north bed in the October light. The garlic goes into the ground at the right depth in soil that knows it and waits.